I remember the exact moment the world ended for us, not with a bang or a broadcast, but with the sound of a man running through wet gravel. It was a sound I knew well from the dozens of cheap films I'd made, the frantic scrabbling of an extra about to be heroically saved or villainously shot. This was different. This was a wet, tearing sound, a panicked rhythm that was all wrong. I was standing by the craft services table, contemplating a stale biscuit and the slow, grinding death of my career, when I saw him. He was one of the local runners, a boy sent into Volkovo for some forgotten prop, and he stumbled out of the tree line with a look on his face I'd never managed to conjure on screen. It was pure animal terror. He was bleeding from a wound on his arm, a ragged mess of teeth marks, and he collapsed before he reached the first production truck. The chaos that followed was immediate and total. He convulsed on the ground, then rose with a speed that was unnatural, his eyes milky white, and he lunged for the nearest sound guy. That was the first scream. The real one. The one that cut through the artifice of our little make-believe war and announced that something far worse had arrived. And in that maelstrom of panic, as people ran in every direction, I saw Anya's younger brother cornered near a stack of prop sandbags. The runner, the thing that was the runner, turned towards him. I was frozen, absolutely useless, a 52-year-old man in a costume, my heart a trapped bird against my ribs. My mind went blank, and my body, conditioned by decades of repetition, did the only thing it knew how to do. It fell back on the script. That morning had started just like all the others, with the damp chill of a Slovnikian autumn seeping through the thin walls of my trailer. I stood before the mirror, a half-empty glass of whiskey leaving a ring on the Formica counter beside me. The man looking back wore the immaculate uniform of Colonel Stryker, the villain of Red Vengeance, and his face was a mask of cold, American authority. I held his gaze, my gaze, and delivered a chilling monologue about the necessity of sacrifice, the words rolling off my tongue with practiced menace. The tremor in my hand as I lifted the glass was the only thing that betrayed the performance, a private little truth in a world of lies. Then a violent banging on the trailer door made me jump, splashing amber liquid over my knuckles. A gruff voice shouted from outside, "Jules, get your ass out here, now." The door flew open, and Marcus Thorne, the film's director, filled the space, his face a knot of impatience. "For God's sake, Jules, it's just a movie. Nobody cares if you're a real colonel. Just say the lines and hit your marks." He didn't wait for a reply, just stormed away toward the main set, leaving me alone in the cramped space. I looked back at my reflection, at the tired, bloodshot eyes staring out from behind the colonel's mask. I whispered the line again, about how fear is a tool, not a weakness. But the words felt hollow now, and for the first time that day, I didn't believe them myself. Outside, the daily grind of our low-budget production was in full swing. I walked through the mud of the decommissioned Soviet base, my spotless costume boots a ridiculous affectation in this sea of decay. I stayed in character, of course, because the role was the only thing left that felt real. I nodded curtly to the local crew, speaking only in my flawless American accent, a performance of condescending authority that was second nature. My translator, Anya Petrova, followed a few steps behind. She was a young university student with a bright, intelligent face, and she watched me with a genuine admiration that was both pathetic and a little gratifying. She thought my dedication was a sign of true artistry, of real gravitas. I ordered a coffee, and she relayed the command in her language with an earnestness that was almost painful to watch. Across the compound, Dmitry Volkov, the head of security, watched me. He was a former Slovnikian soldier with a hard, unreadable face, and his professional suspicion was a physical presence. He knew I'd never seen a real conflict. I could feel it in his steady, dismissive gaze. Over in the command bunker, which was just a plywood set, Marcus was fiddling with a broken shortwave radio, complaining that nothing on this damn set worked. On a small television nearby, a local news broadcast showed grainy footage of riots in a neighboring country, the anchor mentioning a rabid flu before the signal dissolved into static. People's phones were blinking with alerts that would appear for a moment before the network flickered and died for good. It was all just background noise, another layer of misery in a miserable place. As the last bar of signal vanished from every phone, I saw Dmitri stop what he was doing. He was watching me as I imperiously gestured for another coffee, and his eyes narrowed on my perfectly clean boots. Then his gaze lifted, moving past me to a thin plume of black smoke rising from the distant trees, from the direction of the town. Then came the sound of running through wet gravel. The production assistant, the one they sent for supplies, stumbled out of the woods, his face pale and his arm a mess of blood. He collapsed, and then he reanimated. He got up with that terrible jerky speed and launched himself at a nearby crewman. In the chaos, as the first scream ripped through the air, Anya's younger brother was trapped near a pile of equipment. The thing that had been the runner turned, its movements fast and aggressive, and it zeroed in on the boy. My blood went cold. My mind was a white wall of pure terror, but my mouth opened, and the words that came out were not my own. They belonged to Colonel Stryker. Flank left. Suppressing fire! Now! The command was nonsense, a line from page 64 of the script, but it was delivered with such perfect, roaring American authority that the creature actually paused. It was only for a second, a flicker of confusion in its milky eyes, but it was enough. Anya's brother scrambled away, and the moment of hesitation was broken. The thing on the ground was dead, for real this time, but no one was looking at it. They were all staring at me, my face a perfect mask of command I did not feel. Anya looked at me, her face pale with shock and something else, something like awe. She breathed one word: Colonel. The survivors scrambled into the command bunker, the plywood set piece now our only refuge. Dmitri took charge immediately, barking brutal, efficient orders in Slavnikian. He secured the film's only functional handgun from the licensed armorer, his movements precise and economical. His harshness, meant to instill order, only amplified the growing panic among the local crew. They looked at his cold face and saw only a grim, hopeless reality. That was when Anya, seeing the despair in their eyes, turned to me. She shouted over the frightened whispers, "We listen to the Colonel. He has a plan." Every eye in the room swiveled to me. I stood there in my perfect uniform, the fake hero in a real crisis. I saw Dmitri's expression harden, his hand tightening on the grip of the handgun. In that moment, I understood my choice. I could tell them the truth, that I was a washed-up actor from London and be cast out into the woods to die. Or I could lean into the role. I stepped forward, projecting an aura of calm confidence I had perfected over 100 performances. I offered a vision of hope and order to counter Dmitri's terrifying pragmatism. The choice was clear on their faces. They rallied to me, the reassuring commander, and Dmitri was forced into a subordinate, watchful position. He said nothing, his silence a promise of future conflict. They had chosen me. I was trapped in the part. I formally accepted the role because there was nothing else to do. With Anya at my side translating my words, and a bewildered Marcus feeding me technical advice from a world that no longer existed, I outlined a strategy to fortify our position. I used the language I knew best, the language of the set. We established blocking on all entrances, set up key lighting on the kill zones, and run comms checks every hour. The last piece of blocking, a heavy metal wardrobe rack, scraped against the concrete floor as two stagehands shoved it against the main door. The bunker was secure, for now. I turned to face my new command, the small, terrified group of survivors. They looked at me with expectant faces, waiting for their next order, their next line. A wave of nausea washed over me. What, in God's name, did I do now? I could not speak a word of their language, so Anya became my voice, my shadow, my entire connection to the people I was supposedly leading. She stood at my shoulder in the dim command bunker, her face intent as I pointed at the prop map of Slavnikia, a useless glossy thing we had tacked to the wall. I spoke and she translated, her words turning my theatrical nonsense into crisp, believable commands. She never questioned me, not once. I was pulling lines from a half-remembered script for a film called Desert Hoxie, weaving them into a new fiction for our survival. After one of these sessions, a grueling hour of planning patrols and rationing the last of the craft service's chocolate, the others filed out, leaving just the two of us in the cold air. She looked at me, her eyes so full of a terrifying belief it felt like a physical weight. I had told her I saw her brother get away during the first moments of chaos, a quick and stupid lie meant to calm her down, but it had instead forged her loyalty into something unbreakable. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice quiet. "We would be lost without you." She touched my arm, just for a second, and the sincerity of it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the bunker's dampness. I was a fraud, a drunken, washed-up actor, and this young woman's hope was entirely invested in the costume I wore. I simply nodded, because the character of Colonel Stryker would not show weakness, and Julian Vance had nothing true to offer. The generator was our heartbeat, a constant noise that powered the perimeter fence and the few lights that kept the deepest shadows at bay, and its rhythm was faltering. Marcus came to me with the news, his face grim. We had fuel, but it was in a supply truck 50 yards outside the wire, a place now occupied by at least a dozen of those things, which the crew had started calling ghouls. They were drawn to the generator's sound, a silent, waiting circle in the darkness. An idea came to me, not from logic, but from a scene in a terrible science fiction movie I did in 2003. It was all about manipulating the audience, which was exactly what I needed to do to the ghouls. I had Marcus rig a massive bank of film lights, the kind used to turn night into day, and aim them at the far end of the compound. This was the key light, the main attraction. Then he set up a smaller, battery-powered fill light to illuminate a narrow path to the truck. "Action," I whispered into the walkie-talkie, and the world outside the bunker exploded with white light. The ghouls, every last one of them, turned as a single entity and began to shamble directly into the blinding beam, mesmerized. It was working. The teams sent to get the fuel moved quickly under the cover of the dimmer light, their shapes dark against the artificial day. Then the big lights flickered once, twice, and went out with a loud pop. The sudden drain had shorted a section of the main fence, and a low electrical crackle was followed by silence. The ghouls, their trance broken, turned from the now dark lamps and saw the open gap in the fence. They started to pour through, but for some reason they kept going toward the dead lights, ignoring the small team that was now frantically hauling cans of fuel back toward the gate. They got the fuel, but one of the men, a sound technician named Stefan, slipped and fell hard, his leg twisting beneath him with a sickening crack. They dragged him inside, his groans of pain sharp in the sudden quiet. We had our fuel, but we also had a gaping hole in our defenses, and a badly injured man whose cries would be a beacon in the night. The food situation became critical just a few days later. Dmitri stood before the group, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. He had done a proper inventory, and his findings were clear. We had maybe a week before we started eating the leather from our shoes. He proposed a direct assault on the main police station in Volkovo, where he knew there was an armory and an emergency food cache. Then he turned to me, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What is your tactical assessment of this plan, Colonel?" It was a trap. Every eye was on me. I couldn't refuse a plan for food, but I couldn't endorse his either, because that would cede command. I walked over to the prop map, buying myself a moment. My eyes landed on a small icon for a market on a side road I remembered from the drive to the location. It was isolated, away from the town center. "A full frontal assault is a fool's errand," I said, my voice echoing the authority I'd practiced in 100 auditions. "Too much risk, too much noise. We'll do a surgical strike, in and out before they even know we're there." It was a complete bluff, but it sounded professional. It sounded safer. The group sided with me. The raid was a disaster. They found some canned goods, but the place was not as empty as I had hoped. A young man from the village was cornered and torn apart. They brought back the food, but they also brought back his absence. Dmitri stood over the tarp that covered the body. "He would be alive if we had followed my plan," Dmitri said, his voice low but carrying through the tense silence. "Your surgical strikes was a mess, Colonel." I saw it then, the shift in the eyes of the others. The doubt was a seed, and Dmitri had just watered it. Marcus, bless his cynical, tech-obsessed heart, had been tinkering with an old shortwave radio from the props department for days. Suddenly, a voice cut through the static, a distorted robotic woman's voice speaking English in a continuous loop. It was a corrupted NATO emergency broadcast. The words were broken, but the message was clear enough. Evac. U.S. military, Volkovo airfield, final quarantine protocol, a destination. A real one. Hope surged through the bunker, so powerful it was like a drug. Dmitri wanted to leave immediately, to gather what we could carry and march the 100 kilometers to the airfield. I saw the madness in that. A disorganized, terrified column of people walking into a slaughter. I was losing control, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I performed. I climbed onto a supply crate and gave them the grand speech, the one my character Colonel Stryker delivers to his demoralized troops before the final battle in Red Vengeance. I spoke of discipline, of strength, of the difference between blind hope and earned survival. I told them we would prepare, we would train, and we would march to that airfield not as refugees, but as a unit. The speech soared, and it landed perfectly. They cheered, their fear replaced by a renewed, fervent belief in me. I had them back. But as I scanned the crowd, I met Dmitri's gaze. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, but his eyes were cold. It was not a look of agreement. It was a look of final, chilling assessment. He knew. Our planning sessions for the trip became a quiet war. Dmitri would ask simple questions, each one a perfectly aimed dart. We were looking at the map, tracing a route to the airfield. "This bridge here," he said, pointing a thick finger at a line crossing a river. "What is the load-bearing capacity for a Soviet-era rural trestle bridge? We have the production bus." I felt a prickle of sweat on my neck. I had no idea. "We'll have to assume it's compromised. We'll send a scout team ahead to test the structural integrity." It was a vague, evasive answer, and we both knew it. He looked at me, a flicker of something close to triumph in his eyes. He knew for certain now. He stopped challenging me in front of the others after that. He would just watch, his silence more unnerving than his questions. He was no longer trying to convince anyone else. He was just gathering what he needed to act on his own. The moral cost of my performance escalated. One of the survivors, a quiet man who helped with the fortifications, had been bitten during a perimeter check. He hid it, of course, wrapping his arm in dirty rags. But during the evening ration distribution, I saw his hands shaking, a sheen of sweat on his pale face. The character I was playing would not hesitate. The real me wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen, but the lie was all I had. "We have a new quarantine protocol," I announced, my voice hard. I ordered the man isolated in a storage shed. The next morning, the expected guttural sounds came from behind the locked door. Everyone gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and expectation. This was a test of my leadership. I walked to Dmitri and held out my hand. Without a word, he unholstered his handgun and placed it in my palm. The weight of it was obscene. I walked to the shed, unlocked it, and shot the thing that had been a man. The gunshot was deafening in the cold morning air. I turned back to the group, my face set like stone, just like the director for Red Vengeance had told me to do. It worked. Their fear of me was now greater than their fear of the unknown. But then I saw Anya. She was staring at me, her face a mask of pure horror. The blind admiration was gone, replaced by a terrible dawning fear. The breaking point came over something stupid, something small. We were in the command center, arguing over the dwindling ammunition supply for the few real weapons we had. Dmitri was pushing me, relentlessly, on numbers and calibers. I was stressed, exhausted, my mind a jumble of real fears and memorized lines. "We need cover and fire to lay down suppression," I barked, the line coming unbidden from a truly awful movie I'd made about rogue cops. A thick silence fell over the room. Dmitri looked at me, and his voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it all the more devastating. "Cover and fire 'tis suppression," he said. "You are not a soldier. You are an actor." It was over. In that one moment, the entire performance collapsed. His men moved, taking the handgun from my belt and securing the room before I could even react. The shouting had attracted the ghouls, and a loud metallic groan echoed from outside as the main gate began to buckle under their collective weight. Anya just stared at me, her face crumbling with betrayal. "You lied?" she whispered in English, her voice breaking. Dimitri locked me and Marcus in a metal shipping container. It was pitch black and smelled of rust and mildew. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the attack, the screams, the panicked shouting. I heard Dimitri yelling orders, brutal and absolute. "Seal the door. We can't save him." A man died because of that order. A sacrifice born of panic, not strategy. Trapped in the dark, everything broke inside me. I told Marcus everything. The whole pathetic story of my life, my failed career, the daughter who wouldn't speak to me, the terror that had been living in my throat for weeks. I was just a sad, frightened old man in a costume. Unseen by me, Anya had crept to the container, maybe to scream at me, maybe to demand an explanation, but she stopped. She heard Dimitri's panicked command get a man killed. And then, through the container's metal vents, she heard my confession. She heard the truth behind the lie. She heard the broken man, not the monster. She watched the brutal pragmatist fail, and she listened to the fraud's pathetic humanity. A choice had to be made. She pulled a small key from her pocket, the key to the heavy padlock on the container door. The heavy clank of the padlock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The container door groaned open, a rectangle of gray, chaotic light against the profound blackness. Anya stood there, her face smudged with dirt, her expression stripped of all its previous admiration. She looked at me not as a hero, but as a tool she was about to use. Rain slicked her hair to her forehead, and the air outside was filled with screams and the wet, guttural snarls of the ghouls. "They don't need an actor," she said, her voice steady over the din. "And they don't need a soldier. They need a leader." She held out her hand. In it was not a weapon, but a walkie-talkie. "Get up, Colonel." I took it from her. The plastic was cold and solid in my palm. My hand was not shaking. In that moment, watching the panicked, disorganized defense of the compound fall apart, I understood what she was asking. The role was over. The performance had to become real, or it was all for nothing. I pushed myself to my feet, my costume torn and filthy, and stepped out into the rain. I keyed the microphone, the static hiss a prelude to the final act. My voice cut through the chaos, amplified by the speakers in the command center and the radios held by Dimitri's men. "All right, listen up. This is the Colonel. We're changing the script." I found Dimitri in the command center. He was shouting at a group of terrified villagers who were trying to barricade a door that was already splintering. He saw me, and for a second his face was a mask of pure fury, but it faltered as he saw the look in my eyes. I walked straight to him, ignoring the chaos around us. "You were right, Dimitri. I'm not a soldier. I'm a fraud." He just stared at me, his chest heaving. "But I'm a damn good director," I continued, my voice low and urgent. "You know how to fight. I know how to get everyone to their marks on time. I need a first sergeant." He looked from me to the collapsing defenses, to the people running without direction. He saw his own tactical knowledge was useless against sheer panic. He saw the logic in my words, the only logic left. He gave a sharp, angry nod. The argument was over. We had a mission. I climbed to the roof of the main bunker, the walkie-talkie clutched in my hand. From there, I could see the whole ugly stage. The production bus was by the main gate, our only way out, its engine idling. Between us and it was a sea of grasping, snarling bodies. I took a breath and began to direct. "Marcus, the Klieg lights on the west wall now. Blind them." A huge section of the yard flooded with unbearable white light, and the ghouls in that sector recoiled, hissing. "Dimitri, take your team left of the light. Use the prop containers for cover. Move, now." I could see his men moving, a dark, efficient line in the mud. Anya was on the ground, her voice a constant, calming presence as she herded the civilians toward the path Dimitri was clearing. "Sound department, playback 4, maximum volume." A pre-recorded explosion, something from the film's sound library, roared from speakers near the breached fence, drawing a mass of the creatures away from our path. We used every trick, every piece of cinematic fakery we had. Pyrotechnic squibs popped like gunfire, creating diversions. A smoke machine billowed thick fog across the open ground, providing cover for the last desperate sprint. It was chaos, but it was choreographed chaos. Dmitri fought with a brutal grace on the ground while I moved the pieces from above, my voice the one constant thread holding the entire escape together. We made it to the bus, the last of the survivors scrambling aboard, their faces pale with terror. But the main gate wouldn't close. A wrecked security jeep was wedged against it, its frame buckled. It needed to be pushed clear, just a few feet. Dmitri and I and two other men threw our shoulders against the cold, wet metal. The ghouls were closing in, their snarls growing louder. We gave one last, desperate heave, and the jeep scraped free. As I turned to run for the bus, a ghoul lunged from the darkness under the chassis. It grabbed my ankle and I went down hard. My leg twisted beneath me and I felt a sharp, sickening snap. The pain was white and absolute. I couldn't get up. I looked at Dmitri. He was already turning back for me. "Get them out of here, Sergeant," I said, my voice clear and steady over the pain. "That's an order." He hesitated, his face a conflict of duty and instinct. I saw Anya screaming my name from the door of the bus. I looked back at Dmitri and gave him a final, decisive nod. He understood. He shoved the last man onto the bus and slammed the heavy door shut. The engine roared as he ran for the driver's side. The horde was almost on me. My leg was useless. This was the end. I saw a road flare on the ground near the jeep. I crawled, dragging my broken leg through the mud, and grabbed it. I struck the cap, and a brilliant red light bloomed in the darkness, pulling every eye, living and dead, toward me. I keyed the walkie-talkie one last time, the red glare painting the faces of the approaching ghouls. The colonel was gone. This was just Julian Vance. "Anya," I said, my own voice unfamiliar after so long. "Anya, listen to me. Find my daughter. Her name is Eleanor Vance. Tell her her father was a fool. Tell her he was a coward his whole life. But tell her at the end, tell her at the very end, he learned how to hit his mark." The first one reached me then, its teeth snapping inches from my face. Weeks later, the bus was parked in a clearing deep in a quiet forest. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the branches of the pines and muffling the world. The small group of survivors huddled around a crackling fire, their faces thin but calm. Anya sat on a log. A few of the younger children gathered at her feet. She was their leader now, her authority gentle but unquestioned. Dmitri stood at the edge of the firelight, a silent, watchful guardian, his rifle held loosely in his hands. Anya held a book in her lap, its pages tattered and stained with what looked like dried blood. It was my copy of the Red Vengeance script. She pointed to a line on the page, her finger tracing the words for a small boy who stared with intense concentration. "Again," she said softly in English. "We do not break." The boy repeated the words, his voice small but clear in the vast snowy silence. "We do not break, we endure." It was a line I never got to say, a line for a hero I only pretended to be. The lie had become their truth, the story that would carry them forward,